Hello everyone, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. So an open question seems to be whether or not service providers will be taxed on any federal funds that they're getting, let's say currently from programs like ARPA or future funds from something like the IIJA. Be right back and we'll look at that. Thanks for joining me. Rick Husey here with Zquorum for Broadband Deployment News. So I saw this article come up in a blog that somebody does. It's called Pots and Pans. This is a guy by the name of Doug Dawson. He's president of CCG Consulting. They're a telecom consultant, and he writes fairly regular blog posts on what's going on with broadband, and he talks a lot about some federal funding, those kinds of things, anything that would be related to telecoms in that area. So he's got this at our broadband grants taxable, and he's getting, the reason this is coming up is he was looking at a blog. It says Casey Light of Keller and Heckman wrote a recent blog that warns that federal grant funding might be considered as taxable income by the IRS. And he's got a link to the blog here. So after this is over, I'll go ahead and link to Doug's blog post here, as well as this. There's a link in his post, but I'll go ahead and link separately to the Keller and Heckman post. So Doug notes here that he says it would not affect just the big telcos and cable companies, but also the many small telephone companies and cooperatives, which are also taxable. So obviously the big guys are used to paying lots of taxes. Maybe it would phase them less, but then again, they're going to get a lot more money, so it's going to be a lot of taxes for them as well. It says this is not a new issue. There were a lot of questions about federal grants being taxable in 2009 when the NTIA awarded BTOP and BIP grants that were a result of the stimulus spending that came out of the recession. The IRS eventually declared a safe harbor for those grants, meaning that it agreed not to tax the grant funding. But the threat of possible taxation stopped many of my commercial clients from pursuing those grants. So that would have been, I'm thinking for those grants, it was maybe directly to the operators and not through the states. Lyde points out that the IRS has always presumed that grant funding is income to the entity receiving the grant and is taxable, considering a common type of federal grant, such as when a research lab gets a grant to pay for the salaries of researchers. And Doug notes here, this kind of grant is often awarded each fiscal year to give the grant recipient a chance to spend the grant money in the area the income's received. But grants given to the build infrastructure are different. If a corporation accepts a $10 million grant to build fiber, it cannot expense the fiber immediately to offset the income from the grant. IRS rules have always insisted that hard assets are written off over the economic life of the asset using depreciation expense. He says, I haven't checked lately, but the IRS suggested tax life for fiber has been set at 25 years, meaning that 1/25th of the cost of the fiber is recognized as an expense each year over 25 years. So you get all this money, you have to pay this large tax liability up front, but you can't expense or depreciate any of this stuff for over 25 years, or in total anyway. In this example, a corporation that has accepted $10 million a grant would be saddled with a $10 million revenue and only able to wipe out a small portion of it in the first year using depreciation. Corporation could not use the grant funds to cover the tax liability. Grant money can only be used to build infrastructure, that's correct. Corporation would eventually see the benefit of depreciation on future taxes, but that relief would be glacially slow over 25 years. It would not stop them from having to write a big check to the IRS this year. So again, this is an open point here. Congress could have avoided this issue by explicitly saying that the new grants aren't taxable, but that's not in the various laws. So it's not something that can be gleaned from the laws that have been passed, including the IIJA apparently. As a further word of warning, the same issue would apply to anybody accepting state infrastructure grants, and that's where these grants really are going to be from for the most part, right? So most of this money, the BEAD money, is being granted directly to the state, and the state's going to be working with the local stakeholders and service providers on who's going to then accept a sub-grant for that. It says the state would have to take positive action to forgive the grant from state income taxes, but that would not shield state grant revenue from federal tax liability. It may turn out that Congress might be the only one who can fix this. They certainly didn't intend for anybody building rural broadband to incur a large tax penalty. And then real quickly from the article or the post that he was referring to, again here, broadband grants may be taxable. This is on the Beyond Telecom Law blog from Keller and Heckman. Broadband grants awarded under the programs established by ARPA and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act could be subject to federal corporate income tax effectively requiring corporate recipients of grant funds to return 21% of it to the federal government, as we just saw. Now, this I thought was a very interesting point. So, if not conclusively addressed, the taxation issue could significantly blunt the positive impact of broadband grants made under ARPA and the IJA, including the massive $42 billion infusion forthcoming under the BEAD program. That's part of the IIJ. That's the Broadband Equity and Access and Deployment Program. That's the largest bulk of the broadband money is coming from that. Entities expecting to receive grant funds would need to budget for the tax bill, potentially requiring reduction in the scope of their project. So that's a good point right there, in that if you were saying that, we could use $20 million, $10 million, whatever, you're going to have to take portions of that and figure that's just for paying taxes, which is going to reduce the amount of building you can do with that money. Now, this is what I thought was really interesting. Entities might also consider structuring a project so that grant funds are received by tax-exempt entities. So, as I mentioned before, the Biden administration would really like for these funds to go to not-for-profit entities. So they really would have liked to have said that the priorities should be municipalities, cities, towns, kind of things, counties, a state government, for example, that is not-for-profit, or something like an electric membership co-op that's also membership-owned, not-for-profit. But it's not written in the law. They would like that to be the case. The only thing that's written in the law that says you cannot exclude those entities. But it's interesting here that if the IRS doesn't do anything, then it does give a leg up to these nonprofits as far as being able to use more of that money to actually build out infrastructure. Now, it also could be that I suppose a for-profit organization could structure a not-for-profit entity, maybe as they're saying here, that could also receive those funds so they don't have to pay the taxable income. But then again, they've got to run it that way, so they have to run it as a not-for-profit. So I thought that was interesting, being that, again, the Biden administration is really trying to focus these funds to not-for-profits, and the whole point of that is somebody that's not specifically trying to make a profit is going to hopefully keep the prices lower because they don't have as much profit that they're making, right? So anyway, so this is just a heads up for those of you that are looking at these funds coming down the road, or maybe you just recently accepted some through ARPA. Again, those funds would be coming from the state, but the state is getting from the federal government. So there's a question as to whether these will be taxed. It's not been addressed. This is coming straight right here from a telecom law blog. So apparently it's not been addressed in the legislation either for ARPA or for the IIJA. And it does sound like something that needs to be brought up. So if you are an interested party, that could be a state, that could be a eligible entity under a state, like, the eligible entities under the IIJA would be the states, for example, or an entity that would get funds from a state, such as a telephone company, cable company, municipality, electric co-op, anybody that could be getting these funds. It would behoove you to go find out, try to find out from the IRS, the federal government, your congressperson, what they plan on doing about that. They need to clarify this so that people know what they're getting into here, what their tax liability would be, and how much, are they going to be able to use 100% of those funds for building out broadband? Obviously, they can't, as he said, you cannot use some of these funds to pay for the taxes. So they're going to have to basically budget this money out. So they'll have to use 100% of the funds for building broadband, but then they've also got that tax liability sitting on top of them. So that's going to reduce the amount that they can actually do with that money in an indirect kind of way. So that's it. I hope that was helpful. If so, go ahead and give me a thumbs up on the video here if that's something new to you. It was new to me. And then subscribe to our channel if you're not subscribed. Click the little bell and you'll be notified when we are live. So thanks for joining me, and I will see you next time on Broadband Deployment News. Bye-bye.